Hi, my name is David Warner Matheson, and I've just returned from the wonderful Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge 2019, the 11th such Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge. And it was started by Walter Cruttenden at the Binary Research Institute. And he spoke this year and he showed this slide from the researchers at Caltech, the astronomers at Caltech. And I'm going to read the caption. You can see here, this is our solar system with the sun in the center, right there. And then these purple orbits are, I'll read the caption, the 6 most distant known objects in the solar system with orbits exclusively beyond Neptune. And the caption says, this is a slide actually from 2016, but Walter Cruttenden's been talking about the evidence for this for a long time before that. So it says, the 6 most distant known objects in the solar system with orbits exclusively beyond Neptune all mysteriously align in a single direction. This orbital alignment can only be maintained by some outside force. And if you're familiar with the work of Walter Cruttenden, he argues that that outside force is actually a star, not even a planet, because at first the astronomers were saying, well, it must be some large planet, but as they keep not finding the planet, they have to go further and further out, and so the object has to get more and more massive. And so now they're saying, well, maybe it's a black hole that's way out there, a tiny one, but still very massive. Well, Walter Cruttenden's been talking about this for over a decade, and he's been saying it's actually the sun is likely in a binary relationship with another star. But this kind of evidence shows that there's something out there. And actually in my this is not my most recent book, this is my second most recent book, Star Myths of the World, Volume 4, Norse Mythology, I talk about a use of this metaphor, or a metaphor very similar to this, all the way back in 1908 by a translator named Olive Bray, who translated the Elder Edda, which contains the records of Norse mythology. It's one of the main sources for our knowledge of Norse mythology. But the Elder Edda, as Olive Bray explains in 1908, was not known until the 17th century, but its existence was hinted at by the texts that we did have, including the poetic Edda, which is known as the Younger Edda sometimes, Snorri's Edda, it's sometimes called, because of Snorri Sturluson. But they didn't have the Elder Edda, but they could tell, hey, there's some other text out there, or some other body of wisdom that's influencing the texts that we have. And then it came to light in the late 1600s, which is the 17th century. So Olive Bray compares that discovery of the Elder Edda to the discovery of Neptune. Remember, we just saw the 6 most distant known objects in the solar system with orbits exclusively beyond Neptune, because Neptune is the farthest planet now that Pluto's been demoted. But when Olive Bray was talking about this, the discovery of Neptune was still fairly recent. So he writes about the discovery of the Elder Edda, and he says, the finding of the first and most complete manuscript was somewhat dramatic and resembled the long-awaited discovery of the planet Neptune. Magnus Olafsson had suggested the former existence of a more, quote, ancient Edda, unquote, and we soon find this hypothetical work regarded in the light of a hidden treasure of wisdom and ancient lore, of which all existing fragments were but, quote, the bare shadow and the footprint, end quote. We know nothing of how it was tracked and at last discovered, but by 1643, the Codex Regius was in the hands of Bishop Brynjolf, end quote. So in 1908, Olive Bray, the translator of the Elder Edda of the 1908 translation of the Elder Edda is comparing the discovery of the Elder Edda to the discovery of Neptune, because the existence of the Elder Edda was suspected by its influence on other texts before it was even found. And so I talk about this a little bit, and I say, this charming metaphor is all the more appropriate in that it can also be used to describe the postulated existence of some presently unknown but extremely influential culture or civilization of extreme antiquity, whose system of spiritual metaphor or mythology has somehow influenced the ancient myths, scriptures, and sacred stories of virtually every culture on our planet, including those which, like the outermost planets known prior to the discovery of Neptune, are the, quote, farthest out civilizations known to current conventional historians and academics, such as the cultures of ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient China, and the ancient Indus-Saraswati civilization. So the ancient cultures that we know of are kind of like the most distant planets that we knew of before Neptune, or they're kind of like the most distant objects that we know of today. Those are the oldest civilizations we know of, but we can see that they're being influenced by something that's even older, or they appear to be influenced by something that's even more distant, because they're all using a system of celestial metaphor at the heart of their mythologies. The mythologies of ancient India in the Vedas, or the mythology of ancient Egypt in the most ancient texts that we have, or the most ancient texts of ancient Mesopotamia, are already using this system of celestial metaphor. And this same system, it's a worldwide system. We see it in the Norse myths. We see it in the texts of the Bible. We see it in myths from around the globe, including myths from Australia, myths from Africa, myths from Asia, ancient China and ancient Japan, the ancient Greek myths, myths from the Americas, from the Maya, from the Pacific. So that's like some object that's out there. There's so much evidence that there was a much more ancient culture than what is currently admitted by the conventional academia. This more ancient culture clearly is influencing the most distant cultures that we admit to knowing, like ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia. It's out there. It's like this object that's influencing the orbits of the objects in our solar system that Walter Cruttenden talks about. And so that's why it's such a wonderful conference, because it's talking about this, and it's also talking about ancient civilizations. That's what the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge has been talking about since it started. So the evidence is overwhelming. There's archaeological evidence, there's cultural evidence, and there's also an enormous body of mythological evidence, which shows that the conventional paradigm of human history is gravely flawed and in need of radical revision. And the myths are a whole nother body of evidence, a whole nother field of study that points towards the existence of something big back there, way back there in ancient history, beyond the furthest distant, most ancient civilizations that are admitted to by conventional academia today, that it's known by its influence, just like Olive Bray was talking about in 1908 when he talked about the existence of the Elder Edda being seen even before they discovered it. And he compared it to the discovery of Neptune, which when he was writing had only happened less than 50 years earlier.